Hey up everyone and welcome back to the future. What you're going to be seeing here is another combat mission Black Sea multiplayer quick battle between a Jarmanji's Ukrainians who are attacking my Russians. Now I'm not going to lie about this is a pretty brutal one-sided battle. But that doesn't mean that it's not still tactically interesting, and one of the things that really comes out of it is the big differences between the World War II titles and the modern ones, which is to say that back in World War II, you don't really need to worry about the technology and things like that. Now, on the modern battlefield, it's a really big deal, and we're going to be exploring that a little bit. But first, it's a matter of getting back to basics and having a look at the ground that we're going to be fighting over. Now, there's lots of different ways to do this, lots of different ways to look at the terrain, how it's going to relate to the attack, how it's going to relate to the defense. You have acronyms like ACOCA that are there to help you systematically dissect it, give it the Bill Hardenberger treatment. But I've pretty much worked out what I wanted to do here within about 30 seconds of looking at the map. This is the view from my opponent's deployment zone. This is the direction he's going to be attacking from. To get out of his deployment zone, he has to cross this ridge. It's a kind of vertical choke point. I know he has to come over there at some point because he's trapped in this corner. So immediately, I'm thinking about setting up my defense in a reverse slope position on the other side. So how do I want to set this up? Well, there's three broad directions he can go here. He can go up and over the plateau in the middle to push my left flank down by the river. He can go directly up the centre, go over the plateau and down into the valley on my side, or he can take the right hand ridge or go through the little gap up there to push my right flank. Of these options, I'm not too worried about my far left, because the way off the plateau is steep, rocky, totally unsuitable for tanks and vehicles, and a hook round from that direction would be slow enough for me to react and reorientate to. That leaves me the other two routes, and because I'm basically deciding that I don't need to defend the left hand side of the map, that's going to let me concentrate my forces. Better yet, the plateau is what you might describe as a terrifyingly flat, coverless death trap, and while that means that I'm fairly restricted in my choice of defensive positions up there, I'm perfectly happy to hold it quite thinly and use it as a gigantic flat kill zone. And that means that I can squeeze even more stuff into my right flank. But what exactly am I squeezing in there? You get a lot of points to play with in the combat mission Black Sea quick battle, so I was able to just about scrounge a cut down battalion tactical group in the BTR flavour, which you know must be good because it has tactical in its name. This is a proper full-on ready-made combined arms formation, so all the different elements that you usually have to purchase separately back in the World War II titles, infantry, tanks, air defence, artillery, engineers, are all bundled together, integrated into the same chain of command. The final setup then is all about depth and making sure that my key weapons here, the tanks and the anti-tank missiles, have good complementary fields of fire. So out in front, right on the edge of my deployment area, right on the edge of the crest of the hill, I've got my recce platoon, which I've beefed up with some scout teams, with some more RPG teams, and they're in the good old tripwire outpost line kind of mode. Hopefully they're going to be able to listen to what's going on the other side of the hill, and I can get a bit of early warning. You can see I've got one team out on the far left there, right on that side of the plateau, so that if my opponent does go that way, I'm going to know about it. He's not going to be able to sneak past. Further back from them, we've got the rifle companies. We've got first company on the right hand side of the plateau, second company in the right hand valley, and third company is way at the back, down in the actual objective as a kind of backstop. And as you can see, I've pretty much garrisoned all the buildings that I can, and I have these little platoon-sized strong points scattered about the place. After the rifle companies, we've got the proper meaty stuff. We've got the two tank platoons attached to first and second companies. I've got one on the left, which is hiding under some trees in case there's any aircraft. They're my immediate kind of counter-attack force. If my opponent pushes left, they can come up, peek over the slope onto the plateau and hit him in the flank. The second platoon is way off on the right in good defilade positions in that orchard over there where they can cover the plateau very well. And the anti-tank platoon is set up right at the back to make the most out of their anti-tank missiles, where they've got the long range, they should be fairly safe from incoming enemy fire, and they can just concentrate on blowing tanks up. And that's about it for the planning. While the actual setting up of the individual units, choosing good fire positions, making sure that the kill zones are comprehensively covered is pretty time consuming, the overall concept for the defence is pretty simple, very straightforward, and there's really no need to be fancy about it whatsoever. Kicking off then, the recce platoon immediately picks up some sound contacts down in the enemy deployment zone. Tanks. Lots of tanks. They can also, if you listen carefully, just about hear some mortars thunking away in the background. So I know within the first 30 seconds that my opponent has brought some tanks and he's brought some on-map mortars along. And the best part is that the tanks are coming straight in. Though of course there's the obligatory Muppet with an RPG who decides to take some pot shots at the tank commander with his carbine instead of, blowing the tank up, but I'm starting to think that that's part of the course for anti-tank teams. Those mortar rounds are falling right at the back. One of the rounds has strayed a little bit close to one of my AT-14 teams, so that team's going to have to shuffle around a bit. That's okay, they can pop back out again when the bombardment stops. But the key thing here is that there are 3 enemy T-64s parked on the skyline on the top of that ridge, and they are about to have a really, really bad day. And you can see how I've stacked the odds in my favour here with the deployment. Think about this from the T-64's perspective. Up there on top of the ridge, it's got an entire valley to look at. There's a huge amount of potential enemy positions. This AT-14 team is 1,000 metres away, a whole kilometre. It's just 3 guys and a tripod in the shadow of a barn. The T-64 has some very old school night vision optics, so it's not going to be able to see. It doesn't have any thermal. It really doesn't have a cat in hell's chance. As opposed to the AT-14 team, which is sitting there, all they have to do is sit still. They've got some thermal imaging on the tripod. All they have to do is aim a laser at the tank, fire the missile follows the laser, boom, straight in through the front. One of the AT-13s, the company level anti-tank missile, also has a go. That just about misses, but only just. Then we have one of the T-72s joining in. Finally, the original AT-14 is reloaded, gets another round off. 4 shots, 3 dead T-64s. You can't ask for much more than that. I'm not having everything my own way though. Over on my right, an AT-13 team has fired a missile at a T-64 that's poked over the top of the hill, but they've missed. Now, the T-64 has spotted them pretty easily and it's starting to shell them. It's in a good position with this mound to its right covering that side, so only a few of my anti-tank assets can see it. 2 of those assets are in the building which it's now shelling, and obviously they're a little preoccupied with not dying. So I'm going to be taking some casualties. This is one of the issues with this setup here. Yes, I've got the rifle platoons in these strong points, but the strong points are in pretty obvious, pretty exposed positions, and they invite the enemy to shoot at them. On the one hand, this means that I'm going to be taking casualties. On the other hand, this means that the enemy, if he wants to attack them, is stopping on the ridge in the kill zone, and it doesn't take long for one of the AT-14 teams further back to spot him and blow him up. My opponent's also started trying to push into the little valley, the little gap in between the plateau and the ridge, and he's moving in with some infantry who are conveniently skylined for all of my recce teams on the reverse slope who get the first shots off, but there's just too many of the enemy. Very quickly my guys lose their fire superiority and they're forced to back off, leaving some casualties behind. This isn't much of a big deal. Remember, this is the outpost line. It's just a little tripwire. If they can do some damage then that's fantastic, but they're really there as early warning. Funnily enough, I happen to have a target reference point in there for exactly this eventuality. It doesn't take long until I'm dropping 120mm mortars on the positions that I just evacuated. All of this is pretty much just the preliminaries. My opponent is gradually stacking up the hillside with infantry so he can get eyes on the other side of the crest, and a little while after the mortars stop falling, he starts to probe again. An infantry squad pushes past the farmhouse and goes down into the valley, but it runs straight into the killing field of one of my platoon strong points, and it just gets lit up by everything. The amount of firepower that a modern infantry platoon can put out is pretty scary. There's RPGs, rifle grenades, machine gun fire. Everyone's got an assault rifle. To cap it all off, there's also a BPR-80A with a 30mm cannon tucked away in a keyhole position, specifically to just annihilate any infantry that come down that way. Again, it's about engaging the enemy on my terms, and I want to engage him in a way that he doesn't have a chance. We are, however, getting to crunch time now. My opponent's decided that popping up in dribs and drabs, trying to do a bit of reconnaissance, doing a bit of probing, that's not working. And what he has to do is go all out in a last-ditch effort to stack the hill with firepower, gain some fire superiority, destroy my positions, and get the ball rolling, because so far I've pretty much stonewalled him. Obviously, he doesn't want to become stuck down in his deployment zone, he wants to get out. And the reason I know this is because suddenly a lot of tanks turn up. The ones on the plateau, there's a tank platoon of 3 tanks that pops up there, get wasted pretty quickly. But it's the ridge that's giving me issues because it wasn't as well covered to begin with. Some of the anti-tank assets covering it have already been killed or driven off, and the others are getting shut down fairly quickly because the infantry near the tanks are communicating to positions to them, and every time they fire they can expect to get some fire back, so they're either dead, suppressed, or I'm having to relocate them. This is not as bad as it could have been, mainly because my opponent has perfectly timed this push up onto the ridge with an incoming air attack, which could have done quite a significant amount of damage. Unfortunately for him, I've got a Tunguska self-propelled AA vehicle at the back, and it simply shot it down immediately. If he has any other helicopters that he called in, they've also been driven off by the fact that the first one was shot down extremely quickly. So we have something of an impasse developing where he's up on that ridge and I can't do very much about him, but he seems quite reluctant to push down into the valley and exploit that success. And of course, I'd love it if he pushes down into the valley because he's going to get into close confines with all those RPG teams, his infantry is going to suffer, there's going to be lots of little ambushes, he's going to push past all of these platoon strongpoints. So what do I need to do here? Well, it's time for a bit of a counterattack. This doesn't mean that everybody is suddenly going to be fixing bayonets and charging forwards. This is still an exercise in fighting the enemy on my terms. What I want to do is throw him off balance. He thinks he might be starting to get somewhere because he's up on that ridge putting the fire out. What I want to do is let him know that he's not. Give him a bit of a psychological kick, and hopefully, obviously, do quite a lot of material damage at the same time. So if you look at the way the enemy's deployed, they're strung out in a line on the ridge, and their right flank, my left, looks like it's pretty clear. So what I want to do is take the T-72 platoon I have in reserve, take it round the edge of the plateau, pop it up over the crest, and hit him in the flank at long range with some serious firepower from some hull down positions. That's the concept. First, what I need to do though is a little reconnaissance work, because obviously just because I don't think that there's anything there doesn't mean that there isn't. I don't want the T-72s running into some RPG teams or some lurking enemy tanks, that kind of thing. So the recce platoon is actually going to do some reconnaissance, and there's this team on the far left is kind of probing forward along the edge of the crest, seeing if it can hear anything, really listening out for those sound contacts on the other side that might give away some enemy vehicles, waiting to see if they get shot at, to see if there's any enemy infantry hanging around. There is a little enemy activity. Another enemy infantry probe bumps into the outpost line and gets given a hard time. But they're a long way away from the position I want the T-72s to pick up, so I'm not too bothered. The tanks get the green light to move up. These T-72s are in a totally different league to the T-64s that they're going to be going up against. They were recently upgraded in 2012, only 5 years before the game is set. They have thermal imaging, they have better communications equipment, better optics, better armour, better explosive reactive armour, better ammunition. Everything about them has been pushed a few generations further on from the T-64. And it doesn't take long, once they've gotten into position, for them to really start putting the hurt on. The enemy here is pinned in place. He can't go back because of the map edge, he can't go forward because he'll expose himself to the rest of the defence. There's no cover in there, the terrain is now against him, he's trapped in an L shape. Even though by now most of the T-64s have been picked off one by my defence on the other side of the ridge, this is still a major hammer blow, materially and psychologically. He does manage to fire some AT missiles off, but only 2 of them hit, and they don't defeat the armour on the T-72s. They do some minor damage to some of the outside equipment, not enough to upset the crews inside at all. The game is now devolved into an exercise of me shooting fish in a barrel. So a few turns of this is enough to precipitate a ceasefire and a one-sided total victory in my favour. I can't say I'm particularly proud of this. As we were playing, it quickly started to look like it was an unfair fight, and maybe the setup should have been tweaked to give the attackers a more solid advantage. But the foundations of the defence are all there. Understanding and exploiting the terrain, using depth, using reserves, having an outpost screen, absorbing the enemy's momentum and then counter-attacking, they're all on show, and that's why this battle made it to YouTube. And these are real fundamentals. If this had been a World War II game, I would probably have had a fairly similar setup, and the differences would have been in the speed of spotting and engaging the enemy, the accuracy of the weapons, and the amount of firepower that would have gone out. The World War II titles let you get away with some mistakes. The modern era doesn't. So that's it for now from the Ukraine guys. Hope you enjoyed this. Don't forget to comment, rate and subscribe. I do read all the comments, even if I'm too useless to think of a decent reply most of the time. I've got a couple more Black Sea games that might be up next. I've got another final Blitzkrieg game that's just about winding up. That's a good one. So there's a lot more in the pipeline. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next video.